Welcome to the SparkCom podcast, where we talk about trends, innovation, and what's coming next. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
You can find more information at sparkpartners.com. And, with what we talk about on a weekly basis in our podcast, we kind of go the gamut from talking about some government stuff, talking about retail, talking about real estate, and we've done ones on rockets. And on today's episode, we're going to have a conversation with a dear friend of mine who is Doug Hochstead, who is a assistant vice president for the University of Arizona, Tech Launch Arizona. So I'd like to invite him in, and we're going to have some time to ask him some questions and be able to chat with him regarding what innovation and things are happening. Hey, Doug, how are you doing today?
I'm wonderful, Manny. Nice. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'd like to introduce you to Adam Hartung, my partner at Spark Partners.
How you doing, Doug?
Hey, Adam. Nice to meet you. Your name is spelled very odd for Adam.
Yes, I share the Zoom link.
So, Doug, I'd like to have maybe a little bit of a background on you. I mentioned to the audience kind of what the relationship that, I've known you for many years. And for a while, I was on the board of Tech Launch Arizona, and that's where we got to meet. So maybe give us a bit of a history on you, and then I've got a few questions, and Adam's got some questions as well.
Sure, absolutely. I'll try not to get too much in the weeds. My background is actually in computer engineering. That's where I grew up, and my first career was related to computer engineering, specifically in something called, it was related to executive desktops, getting executive information systems in place. Did that for over a decade and was lured away by startups during what lovingly is now called the dot bomb, and ended up getting tied back in through my career to the University of Michigan, which is my alma mater, kicking off a software licensing arm of their tech transfer group. And I stayed at the university there for a little over a decade, working with them to build up tech transfer. They went through a whole turnaround. And about 8 years ago now, the University of Arizona decided to really kind of rededicate themselves to this concept, which I'll be glad to explain. And they brought me in, as well as a guy named Dave Allen. And we totally revamped what tech transfer was at the university. And it's been really successful to date. So that's kind of the short background.
Sure. For those in the audience that don't know what tech transfer is at the university, why don't you walk us through what that is?
Figured that was a worthwhile thing. So at its basic level, it is, universities like the University of Arizona do a lot of research. And during that research, they invent things. The typical way of getting that out is through publications. In 1980, there was a law passed by the federal government to allow universities to own those inventions and try and commercialize them. And that's what tech transfer is. It is the process of protecting new inventions as a result of research and marketing those inventions, licensing them to existing companies, or building new startups around those technologies to take those out into the world.
Fascinating. Give us a couple of examples of some of the paramount, most successful commercializations in the industry that you can think of.
Well, some really obvious or easy ones. Honeycrisp apples came from a university. Google came from Stanford. Those are all results of tech transfer. At the University of Arizona, probably our kind of shining star right now, it was a company called Symphonia RX, which was technology spun out of our pharmacy group that would track people's prescriptions and be able to see when people were getting things that conflicted. And that often can happen when people have a lot of different doctors, different prescriptions, and different pharmacies filling those prescriptions. And they have millions of interactions where they've essentially prevented bad things from happening.
That's great. Adam, you have any thoughts or questions at the moment?
Well, I heard Doug talk about inventions. How does Doug see the difference between an invention and an innovation?
That's a great question. Thank you. To a large extent, we use those, my group uses those interchangeably. I would say probably a lot of people use an invention in terms of patentability, where something is patented, you have inventors that are associated with that. There's a whole process. Innovations are new things that are either addressing problems you didn't know you have, or fixing problems that you already were trying to fix. It's new things that you can do. That can be anything from a new way to teach a course, to software, to a copywritten document. Could be an innovation. We work on all of those things. So we work on, we don't care if it's patentable or not. Now, patentability has a certain value in it, and that it's a little bit more protectable. But we've spun out companies based solely on software. I know of, not here, but I know of companies that have spun out based on methodologies, things that they want to change in the world.
With the plethora of opportunities that you see, how do you prioritize?
Oh, that's a great question too. Although every question is a great question. We are a service unit for the university. So we work, we're there to make sure that what the faculty and the staff want to get accomplished can get accomplished. So to a large extent, we don't prioritize. The thing that Manny discloses to me today is just as important as the thing that you disclosed to me 2 weeks ago. Now, what ends up happening in a real sense is some things get traction a lot faster, or at least, or more deeply than other things. And those end up bubbling to the top, and the things that you're working on and churning to get through. Because our goal is to get stuff out of the university and license. It's not to make the most money we can make.
When you say things bubble to the top, gain traction, what's the process inside your group or inside the university that pushes something from ordinary to extraordinary?
So we have our group, I'm sorry, I'm hesitating. Our group is formed around two primary functions. One that we call the licensing manager, licensing and IP group. They're the group that are focused on interacting with attorneys, figuring out what's patentable, and actually we do patentability analysis, market analysis, things like that, and moving the technology from an investigator that raised their hand and said, I have an idea, I think it's patentable, can you help me? To, yep, we have something right here that we can now work on. Now that group actually goes cradle to grave. So after they get to the point where they have something, they then work on marketing that to existing companies. To essentially, we have a whole bunch of portals, excuse me, that we put our available technologies on, but plus we spend time finding in the market people that are doing similar things to what we've just created and might be interested in this in their business. And then in let's say 20% of the cases, somebody somewhere says, I think I want to start a company around this. And there's a couple different reasons for that. I can go into those different reasons, but once a decision is made, hey, I think I want to start a company, we have a group that's solely focused on formation of the company. So they're not looking at the intellectual property. That's left to the licensing manager. What they're looking at is, what does this company need to do to take the next step and then the next step and then the next step to get to a point where they are really a company, and then they can license the technology from the university. So even when we start a company, it results in a license because that company is a third party and they're going to take the technology.
When does funding get involved?
So the university funds everything that happens up until the license. So my group funds the patent protection up until an item is licensed. We have a fund called Asset Development that is focused. You can almost think of it like a proof of concept fund, where if we have a technology, an innovation, that we can do something to make it more attractive. Example might be build a prototype. Another example might be run it through some limited set of further research that proves that what we're claiming is true. Some other things that we've done is something that allows us to expand the claims of the patent based on additional work. And so we have funds, and it's $1 million a year that we can invest in technologies to what we call develop that asset, to move it further toward licensing. Now, once a company forms and licenses the technology, we're a state entity. So we're not allowed to invest in companies, and we're not allowed to essentially just give them money. So it's really up to them to try and start raising money. We will help. We help all of our companies in different ways with introductions to venture capitalists or to people with money, with education on how to build a pitch deck, with practice sessions on doing your pitch and getting feedback from a wide group of people. So that's, I guess, one thing I hadn't mentioned. At TLA, one of the things that we're really proud of is our relationship with the community. We've built a group of what we call Commercialization Partners that are all volunteers, and there's about 30 or so of them that work with our group, either on just helping with defining a technology, but more often working with a group that wants to do a startup and helping them through what they need to get done based on their real world experience. And so they will often sit in on those pitch sessions and say, this is what I think you need to do, and this is what I'd be looking for, and stuff like that.
I had the experience where I lived for 25 years in Chicagoland, and about 15 years ago, I was part of a group that took a look at what was happening with the local economy. Illinois is the third largest state economy in the United States. And one of the things that was fascinating was that the University of Illinois and the University of Illinois system was considered one of the best engineering programs in the country. The University of Illinois consistently ranked in the top 4. But almost none of the businesses were ever getting funded. And it was so ridiculous that the founder of Oracle, the founder of MySpace, and the founders of several Silicon Valley companies actually had buildings named after them at the University of Illinois because of the money they gave. But well over 80% of the graduates, closer to 90% of the graduates from engineering programs, when they finished their schooling, went to the coast. The other thing we discovered was that of all the ideas that came up and the business ideas that went through the Tech Launch type program in Illinois, fewer than 1% ever got funded. 85% of them that got funded from the West Coast. And all these programs that were developed at the university, all the ideas that came out, were all ending up in California. And the biggest thing that we could identify when we were trying to do an analysis of what went wrong was that, first of all, Illinois never developed a venture capital community. And second, Illinois' primary employers at the time, which were companies like Kraft, Sara Lee, Motorola, Ameritech, were not investing in startups. They were only investing in their existing businesses. And the result, well, now it's really bad. Now Illinois is the worst performing economy in the United States. It's losing people faster than any other state except West Virginia. It's had 7 consecutive years of lost jobs, 7 consecutive years of lost population, and the economy is absolutely in a tailspin. And people are starting, myself included, pointing to the inability to get startups going. So I say all that because we can look at that model and say that, having great universities and having great ideas and having great inventions is not enough. It takes more down that commercialization path. And how are you trying to address this pull that goes to where all the money is, which is mostly Silicon Valley in New York and California, and then second New York?
Yeah. You've hit upon a key problem. I mean, and it's not, I always call them the flyover states. So I'm originally, as I mentioned, from Michigan. Same problem. You have a brain drain, people leaving. By the time I left, actually, Ann Arbor had done a pretty decent job of drawing in VCs to actually set up kind of like satellite offices, just essentially to co-locate there. And this is a problem in a lot of these flyover states. It's been a problem here. I think we've really focused on two things. One is our goal is to have the startup be successful. That's our primary goal. If that means it has to move to the coast to be successful, we're not going to stop that from happening. Now, that being said, we want to create an environment that makes it possible to happen here. And so one of the things that we think of, or I think of as one of my goals, is to help build the ecosystem here in Tucson and Southern Arizona. So there's a lot of just social events that we're putting on, trying to pull people together, a lot of educational events. There's the Commercialization Partners program I was talking about. And since we've been here, there has been change. So since we've been here, I think there's 4 VC entities that were created, one of which actually is the result of the Symphonia RX that I mentioned was our biggest success to date. Fletcher McCusker, when he left Symphonia and he sold that company, he formed the UA Venture Capital Fund, which is an outside entity that focuses on innovations, or I should say focuses on U of A. Could be from innovations, it could be from students, it could be from faculty, it could be from alumni. But anything that had a tie to U of A was something that they would consider in their round of funding. And they funded, I don't know, approximately 15 companies through their fund so far. And there's been a couple other funds that have been created. We've also really focused on working really closely with Desert Angels. And I'm sure you're familiar with Desert Angels, but I guess for your listeners, it's our angel group here, and it is one of the top 10 most active angel groups in the country. So we really focused on connecting to them. And in fact, just an interesting side note, the person that used to run my venture development team is now the CEO of Desert Angels. So that's the kind of people that are in our ecosystem. I don't know if that directly answers your question, Adam, but I think it's about building this ecosystem.
So how is the pandemic? We're now 1 year into the pandemic, and we have 6 more months to go, 6 months to a year. How has that affected what you do and the company, the university, the companies you work with, the startups?
Personally, I hate it. In a good way, we've been able to work through it because our work, a lot of it anyway, could be done virtually with the faculty. The thing that it's affected the most is it paused research. So with research being paused, well, that meant inventions were not being created as well. So we were working on our backlog, but we were losing our feeder tube for a while. Now that's changed, and research is largely back up and running. But that's probably the biggest impact. That combined with the mind share, right? I mean, we have a significant portion of our faculty are in health sciences, and their mind share was not on how do I get something commercialized. It was how do we address this pandemic. And some things have come out of that. In fact, Manny's intimately aware of at least one of them.
Yeah, as the listeners know, or if they don't know, I run a company called psyox that is a technology to help people breathe easier and improve people's quality of life. And that technology comes from the University of Arizona that we licensed about almost a year ago, actually.
One of the things that we talk a lot on this program about is opportunities. And one of the things that has occurred to me in a role like you have is all these people that go to San Francisco to get money, always refer back to the fact that you have to get a lot of money because it was insanely expensive to live there. It was insanely expensive to get anything done. And with the pandemic, we've seen a dramatic shift. People have fled the San Francisco Bay Area. Rents are down over 20% in the city of San Francisco itself. For the first time, you don't have to get on a waiting list and you don't have to overpay. You don't have to get into a bidding war if you want to try to get someplace to live. It's been a dramatic shift that's happened last year. Restaurants are closing, things are closing, people are leaving. The second largest state in terms of losing population, in terms of raw numbers in last year, was California. People fleeing because of the pandemic. And I wondered if you see an opportunity for how you could leverage what you do and what's happening in Arizona against the situation that's developed where urban density and cost of living are now colliding in this pandemic and as it affects the Silicon Valley area and from Silicon Valley all the way to LA.
Well, absolutely. I mean, not to take advantage of what's hurting them, but I think Tucson is a great destination for the kind of the confluence of the things you're describing. It has a great cost of living. It's got a great anchor university, which I think most places would tell you an anchor research university is key to a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. And we're not too big. I mean, the Tucson area is not too big. There's room to grow. I think it's actually been a positive thing for Tucson and for Arizona in general. Arizona, as I'm sure you know, Arizona has been growing every year for a long time right now.
Well, Tesla, for example, Elon Musk has set up his permanent residence in Austin, Texas. We think he's going to move the headquarters of Tesla to Austin, Texas. Oracle's announced it's moving its headquarters to Austin, Texas. Do you have any programs, or anybody at the state, anybody undertaking any programs to be aggressive about that? To go to these startup companies, to go to these venture capitalists and say, instead of having to pay people $300,000 a year to be an engineer so they can cover the cost of living in Palo Alto, maybe you should take the idea, take the company, and maybe it came from Oregon, maybe it came from Washington, and plunk it right down here in our town because we could support that. Are there any programs underway, any policies that you're taking to get aggressive around that?
Not me personally. That's more the economic development role of the state and of the city, and they are. I mean, I'm aware of some through Sun Corridor, through ACA, and I think they've had some successes. For me, my role in it is really to make sure that people outside the state know what we're doing as far as the innovation side is, as far as the ecosystem growing, and that's really, I guess, tightly tied to the network of VCs that we try and create. So we keep a network of VCs, understanding what we're doing. One group in particular we work really closely with is a group called Osage University Partners. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they're a really interesting model of venture capital focused exclusively on university startups. So those are the kinds of things, anyway, that we're looking at to help kind of attract the right kind of people and money to this area by letting them see, what's available, what's happening. So we need that center of gravity of growth that people will see, yeah, coming here is a real viable and positive alternative, like in your comments, Adam, about cost of living, the cost of employment, all those things.
Yeah, to dovetail off of what you said, Doug, one of the things that where there is a struggle, where I think having an anchor university is beneficial, and is in the human resource. And I can attest that Tucson has a lot of really, really smart people, but we also have a giant defense contractor in town that seems to absorb a lot of the best and brightest talent. So one of the challenges that I've seen when I ran another business here as Terra is people would come work for me for 2 or 3 years and then would get lured with a 25% increase in salary that I couldn't match.
Right.
So I think part of the ecosystem is going to require another couple of prime movers like that to move in the industry so that it will start to equalize the pay rate.
No, I totally agree. And I think that what we need, and I think it's happening, but what we need for really thriving ecosystem is the small, medium, and large. So, there are companies that people can come to, and people can feel comfortable in taking the risks going to a startup, because if that startup fails, which many startups do fail, there's another place to land, either at another startup or a mid-sized company or one of the large companies. And I think that ecosystem is starting to grow in Tucson, but I think that's when I first got here, that was one of the things missing, is there was a lot of angst over starting a company here, because if it failed, what do I do?
Do you ever use external data when you're trying to take a look at these inventions and kind of figure out where they're headed? What I'm thinking about here is you're getting fed a lot of breakthroughs. But as we know, there's a lot of breakthroughs that don't have much commercial viability, or the example that we always talk about is Segway. Really cool, really neat, and really lost a lot of money. And so as you are looking around, how do you big trends like mobile, people working asynchronously, utilizing the gig economy, artificial intelligence, how do those external big trends have an impact on what it is you do?
Well, the big trends I don't want to say don't have an impact, but the best way to describe it is we're not looking at the big trends because we get stuff fed to us. So regardless of what the trend is, somebody's coming to us saying, here, this is my cool new invention. What we do is, yes, we do try and externally validate. So I have a small group of people, a couple of professionals and some students that do market analysis. So they do a patent landscape, figuring out what else is in this patent area. But then also they look at where in the market might this fit, and is there a market for this thing? Or could a market be created? All those questions. Then we also go to this commercialization partner group I was mentioning. We have a twice monthly event called a roundtable, where some number of them, let's say 10 to 15 of them each time, sit down and just talk to us about projects that we have going on. So sometimes it might be, hey, we have this new technology, it does X. We don't know what to do with it. And that gets a discussion going around the table about, well, what this is, sometimes it gets a little bit too technically oriented. We try to steer it back to, we're really worried about the market. But that's kind of the different areas that we start probing into. And then we're members of or relationships with a bunch of different groups like BIO, which is a trade organization related to health sciences, Autumn, which is our organization related to what we do. So there's a whole bunch of groups like that we're also tied into when we get discussions with.
So this internal, you said you had a small internal team, and then you also referred to these external sources. When do they come into the timeline? You've got professors and groups working at the university, working on inventions. And as you said, you go through the process of evaluation, possibly patenting, trademark, licensing, evaluating company formation. When do these people get involved in that process from invention to the end?
Luckily, all the way. So on occasion, it's right at the invention, or when they disclose it to us, when an inventor discloses something to us, we might right then reach out to someone in our CP, our commercialization partner network, to say, hey, I want to talk to you about this. Right at the beginning of it, as soon as we get something, it goes into our pipeline for patent analysis and market analysis. So every technology gets that right at the beginning. Then, not in all cases, but in appropriate cases, we have that roundtable, twice a month. It might get into a roundtable discussion anytime from very early to a couple of years later, if nothing has happened or if something's being worked on and it needs to get bubbled back up. So we really engage with these people all the way through, and in fact, we'll re-engage. So in some cases, we're moving down the path and we're going to start a company, and we make a decision. And I shouldn't say we're going to start a company. The company's going to form, and there's a decision made that really we need a little bit more market information to figure out what's right. We'll actually go back to the market analysis group and say we want an in-depth analysis now, and they'll actually spend some more time and effort on it. We also, one thing I didn't mention, we're an I-Corps site. And if you're not familiar with I-Corps, it is an NSF funded program to kind of look into what's called lean canvas. but specifically focusing on customer discovery. And almost every one of our startup projects, like prior to launch, will actually create a team and go through the ICOR process to figure out if what they're thinking about really does have a market. So all these things kind of interplay, and we just keep reusing those resources whenever we need to move it forward.
All right. Well, we're going to wind down here. Fascinating conversation with Doug. And it obviously didn't give enough justice with just a 25-minute podcast, which we went over, by the way. It's okay. But it's exciting to know what's happening at U of A. I'm obviously from alumni there of U of A. So any final thoughts, Adam?
I think it's going to be really important that psyox or one of your other companies become the equivalent of what Tony Hsieh did with Zappos in Las Vegas. There was very little small business development happening, and Tony ended up being this big win. And as a big win, they started to attract the small companies. Some of the small companies became medium-sized companies, reached out, ended up, connecting up with Tesla, which got the battery factory up in Reno. You need a big win. You really need a big win out of one of these things coming along that can start to generate a lot of attention and pull more money and pull more entrepreneurs and give people a sense that there's an ecosystem. I think that's really if you can make that happen, it's going to make it's going to help you a lot, make your life a lot easier.
Totally agree. And I'll tell you, that's our shots on goal idea. And over the last 8 years, we've done over 100 startups. Most of them still exist. So I agree with you. And I'm looking forward to a couple of them getting really big and successful.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thanks
guys.
for the time, Doug. Go to sparkpartners.com to learn more about what we do. And we also have a course we've talked about in the past, Think Innovation. But for now, we'll sign off. Doug, thank you very much for your time. Adam?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Doug.
See you later. Thanks.